Hello everyone and welcome to our third 2021 summer webinar and open house regarding the abundance of nutrients in plant foods. In this presentation, we'll look at how to optimize omega-3s on a plant-based and raw food diet, one of my very favorite topics. In our June webinar, we looked at where you can get your calcium and vitamin D on plant-based diets, and in July, we looked at iron and vitamin B12. Over the last 2 years, the theme of our summer webinar series was Transcending What's Trending, where we looked at issues like ketogenic diets, intermittent fasting, and how our immune system works in relationship to a whole food plant-based approach. For example, when you're not over-consuming calories, implementing one of the intermittent fasting strategies may not be necessary because you don't need to compensate for over-consuming that you're not doing. You won't be looking towards a ketogenic diet because you're already at a healthy weight. You won't have to overly concern yourself with your microbiome because you're already eating a very high fiber diet, including lots of prebiotic fiber that feeds healthy bacteria in your gut and allows for a healthy microbiome. Not that these subjects aren't fascinating and fun to study, we think they are, but they oftentimes reinforce the benefits of what we're already doing when you're really dialed into the healthiest approach to whole food plant-based nutrition. There is just so much synergy here, no matter what is trending or is not trending at the time. Now, where to obtain key nutrients on plant-based diets and how those nutrients work in the body seems to be perpetually trending. So that's what we're covering in our summer series this year. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Rick Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Karen Dina in a few minutes. We're both chiropractic physicians who have been on the whole food plant-based path for 34 and 33 years each, respectively. Essentially, all of our adult lives having gotten started in late adolescence, and we're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We've hosted plant-based summits for the past 6 years, where we interviewed successful, healthy, long-term raw vegan educators and plant-based doctors to share with you how you can be successful on this path over the long term as well. We're also the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook, which you can see down here in the bottom right, as well as banners from our first 5 years of summits. This year in 2021, we had our Energy Reset Summit, where we branched out a bit further and had more of our plant-based doctor colleagues join us while still having many raw food educators as well. And there we are, your hosts. We're the developers and instructors of the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive plant-based curriculum that we're going into our 6th year teaching, and also the developers and instructors of the precursor to that course, the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes that we taught for 10 years live in person. For those of you interested, we'll share more about our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition plant-based curriculum later on in this webinar. Now, from this and from speaking and teaching at many conferences and events over the years, over the decades actually, we've become known for our thoroughness and our scientific accuracy. That is very, very important to us. Number 2, our ability to make complex subjects easy to understand. We make sure that you see the big picture of each topic and then how all the details fit into context so everything makes sense. We do this for each topic and to see how all the topics fit into the big picture to see a cohesive whole. Number 3, we're known for our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of people's way. I mean, it's tough out there today. No matter what you do, someone's there to tell you why it's bad for you. We hear things like starches aren't healthy, cooked food is poison, juices aren't healthy, smoothies are junk food. You can't get important nutrients like beta-carotene and lycopene from eating raw foods. There's no such thing as B12 deficiency, and all sorts of other myths. Some people even say lettuce is bad for you. But we won't tell you just that anything goes, because that's not accurate and doesn't get you the best results. But we'll put everything into context based on real science and the real life experience of ourselves, our students, our patients, and other plant-based doctors and their patients, and many people we've known in this movement over the decades. This way, you'll understand what's behind the claims and have confidence knowing that you're doing the right thing. We've also been told that we're very authentic, straightforward, and no nonsense, that we tell it like it is. We believe that when you're able to determine and then share what's most accurate about any topic, in this case plant-based nutrition, the results simply speak for themselves. And there's so much good news there. All you have to do is tell the truth. Now, I want to mention that sometimes people get concerned when they hear the term raw food. They think it means things like living on wheatgrass juice and sprouts, or eating an exclusively fruit diet while excluding vegetables, or something else that just sounds way too extreme. What we're really about is studying nutrition from an evidence-based, scientific, results-oriented perspective. And with this approach, it becomes clear pretty quickly that de-emphasizing animal foods and processed foods and instead focusing on whole natural plant foods has a huge array of synergistic benefits. Now, once you get into that realm and continue researching, investigating, and working with people, it starts to become clear that including an abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables in your diet is additionally advantageous for so many reasons. As you'll hear with Dr. Karen's history of fatigue, going plant-based helped enough to give her hope, but then going mostly raw really made the difference, and without exaggerating, really gave her life back and quite a bit more. You can sum up our approach by whole food, all plant, based on fruits and vegetables. Now again, within that framework, we are very inclusive and affirming, while at the same time encouraging people to derive as much of their diets from fresh fruits and vegetables as they can lovingly and comfortably enjoy. We're not going to make anyone wrong, though, for eating brown rice or chickpeas or steamed kale or broccoli. So no matter where you are on this path, if heading toward this approach sounds reasonable and desirable to you, better yet, exciting to you, that's great. Anywhere from just getting started to having been there yourself for many years and wanting further education and refinement that many of our students take advantage of. Before we continue, we'd like to let you know that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individualized healthcare. This webinar is presented with the understanding that we are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. Now, it's possible we may be those practitioners for you, but we want to make it very clear that watching this webinar does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. So let's take a look here. Each of our webinars this year and including in the past years have the same basic format. We start with a basic introduction, which we're just about covered with now. Then we go on to our backgrounds, and each year we have the same background. So in other words, for our 3 webinars in 2019, our backgrounds were each the same. For our webinars in 2018, the backgrounds were all the same. But the 18 webinars and the 19 webinars are different. Same thing for our class information at the end. That's the same for each webinar within the same year, but they are different from year to year. And then in the middle, we have different educational content for every webinar. If you go back and watch some of the previous ones, you'll see some of the same topics, and for some of them there's some overlap, but there's also some differences each time also. So our webinars are very, very educational. And then we'll tell you about our curriculum at the end. And for those of you here live, we have a live question and answer session, but it's not on the recording. So now that we've got the introduction covered, we'll move on to a few minutes of Dr. Karen's background.
I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue for which there was apparently no answer. I was in college at the time and I was sleeping 10, 12, and sometimes even more hours per night, and still waking up non-refreshed. I saw 3 medical professionals, and after multiple lab tests and evaluations, I had a diagnosis: fatigue of unknown origin. They had a whole list of everything that I didn't have, but could not pinpoint the source of my fatigue. I asked every single one of them if my fatigue may have had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle. They all emphatically said no. Things really started to change, however, when a friend gave me a copy of a book that discussed vegan diets and the connection between diet and health. I also learned about the connections between diet and the environment and the way animals are treated. And with all these compelling arguments, I was open to giving this approach a try, and I became vegan. In addition to feeling good about eating compassionately and leaving a lighter footprint on the earth, I was so excited to find that my fatigue actually started to improve, despite what the so-called experts, in this case the medical professionals, said would happen. This personal experience opened the door to my thinking that diet really could make a difference in health and left me open to exploring other opportunities. When I learned about and implemented a raw food diet, my energy soared far beyond the impressive improvements that I experienced by eating vegan. Long story short, my fatigue vanished, along with a variety of other symptoms that I'd had for years, and I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I could not remember a time when I felt better. I started to look healthier and I slept better. I enjoyed exercising and my digestion improved. I was so inspired by the health results I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, nutrition, and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I earned a second undergraduate degree in biology and then received doctorate-level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which helped me to put everything that I observed into perspective, and on a much deeper level. Over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food and tailored it to my individual needs. And we can show you how to do this too. Next, Dr. Rick will share with you a bit about his background and experience with raw food and plant-based nutrition. So take it away, Dr. Rick.
Thank you, Dr. Karen, and hello again, everyone. In this webinar, I'll share a succinct overview of my background and history with plant-based nutrition. And if you'd like more detail and additional information, you can take a look at one of our 2018 or 2019 webinars. So growing up was the typical American food, and for the most part I was healthy, but I had a major issue every spring and a little bit in the fall with hay fever type seasonal allergy issues. I had a runny nose, itchy, watery eyes. I would feel totally drained of energy. When I got to college, I kind of gained the typical freshman 15, but I already had a pretty good head start from high school. And here is a picture of me. I was exhausted because I was having a bad allergy day. I took a nap in the back of my parents' car, and my mom snapped a photo. So as you can see, I wasn't feeling my best. I was very motivated to change. So in 1986, I started making significant healthy changes to my diet, and I lost 15 pounds of fat over the summer. And I was getting some exercise, as you can see, and I was feeling so much better. In 1988, I fasted for 14 days in my college dorm. Not the way I would recommend anyone does it, but one of the benefits of that was that the majority of my childhood allergy issues were gone. I was absolutely amazed at the healing power of the body. I just wanted to keep learning as much as I could. So books, tapes, magazines, went to conferences, events. So from a professional point of view, I went to work at Hippocrates Health Institute a couple years after I finished college. I taught one of the classes there. Then I went to work for JM Marketing, and I was part of the support team. And I would really enjoy it when I'd be explaining things to people who were out getting some of the juice samples, and a crowd would gather around and people are nodding their heads. And that reinforced for me that I really love teaching people about plant-based nutrition. So I wanted to keep learning, so I went back to chiropractic school to earn a doctorate degree. The level of depth and understanding about so many things I had learned about nutrition up until that point increased dramatically, going through especially the first couple of years with all of the science classes, putting 2 and 2 together, brought it up to a level that I'll have to say just wouldn't have been possible without that additional super intensive education. That afforded me the opportunity to earn an advanced degree, and then I went to True North Health out here in California to do an internship in medically supervised water-only fasting. Then I got to see hundreds of other people experience incredible health recoveries like I had with my allergies, but on a professional level. My girlfriend at the time was attending Bastyr University in the naturopathic medical program, and I actually moved up there to support her and be with her. And as you heard previously, you may have guessed that was Dr. Karen, so it had a happy ending. And when I was at True North also, I was involved with their study on water fasting and high blood pressure that Dr. Campbell was also involved with. So in any case, when I moved up to Seattle and Dr. Karen was going to Bastyr University, now I'm going to look more professional here, I taught a class there on plant-based nutrition, and that started to develop me putting together a curriculum, which Dr. Karen has joined me for, and that was some of the early inklings of that. You heard Dr. Karen's story, and then we started developing our Science of Raw Food Nutrition curriculum. We taught that live for 10 years. Eventually, we also updated and expanded and turned that into our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online curriculum, and that's been continuously updated as well. I have a part-time clinical practice working with people on plant-based diets. A lot of those people base their diets on fresh fruits and vegetables, and my clinical experience comes into play in our curriculum and vice versa, and it is really synergistic. Okay, so we've got the introduction covered. You heard Dr. Karen's background and my background, and now we're going to get to the educational portion of the program. For this webinar, the topic is how to optimize omega-3s on a plant-based and raw food diet. Essential fats, including omega-3s, is a very, very extensive topic that is interrelated with so many other parts of our physiology, such as the regulation of blood sugar, cholesterol, triglycerides, many different types of hormones, if our diet is pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and so much more. Today we'll cover some of the basics and look at a few topics in a bit more depth than you may have seen before. We'll start out with saturated versus unsaturated fat and look at not only if they're solid or liquid at body temperature, but of their structure and electrical differences and how that relates to nutrition and health. We'll also take a look at which fats are actually essential that we absolutely need in our diet, and we'll look at how many of them we need and where they come from. And by the way, it's not just learn about flax and chia and you're good. If you want the best overall profile for all the fats in your diet, including the essential fats, make sure to stay tuned. We'll also look at what omega-3s are, why and when they're important. They're always important, but at certain times in life, they're even more critical than at other times. We'll look at brain function, for example, and how omega-3 fats affect hormones. And a tiny little bit of a hormone has a huge effect on our physiology all over the body. So that is critical, a critical piece of the puzzle to make our hormones work properly and make the cells respond to them appropriately. We'll look at the overall exciting, never-ending debate over omega-3 conversion. Can we actually make enough DHA from ALA, the plant omega-3 fat, and do we need fish or fish oil? And we'll also discuss optimizing omega-3 nutrition on all plant diets. And as you'll see, all of these things are interrelated to each other. So we'll weave through and do our best to make sense out of everything. So put on your thinking caps for the next few minutes. And if you understand and you're following along with what I say, lots of things are going to fall into place and make sense. So we're going to start out with the structure of a fat. And don't get worried, I'm going to go through this step by step. We have a central chain of carbons. That's what the C stands for here, all these C's. And we can see that they are surrounded by H's. Those are hydrogens. So you may have heard the term hydrocarbon. Fats are hydrocarbons. Now, this is called a saturated fat because every place that you can fit a hydrogen around the central carbon chain, you've got one. It's filled up there. So the central carbon chain is saturated with hydrogens. As you see here, the shape of this fat is straight. It's stiff and rigid and chemically stable. It doesn't react much, and it tends to be solid at body temperature, but that's not the only thing that matters here. Let's take a look at a different fat here. It's got something different here. It's got something called a double bond. And what that means is, to make a long story short, is because some of the extra electrons that surround the carbon have now gone into creating this double bond, you can see we're missing some hydrogens down below, and that changes everything. So because of that, we've got now a fat that, number one, has a curve to it. We'll talk about the significance of that in a moment. We've got a situation here where there's extra electrons in this double bond that will repel the extra electrons from similar fats coming near it and keep everything fluid and flexible. So, for example, this fat up here, found in abundance in a variety of different animal foods, has a melting point of 157 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning it is solid at body temperature. Just by making this one little change here, adding this double bond, missing some hydrogens here, and making this fat curve, this fat down below has a melting point of 61 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning it is liquid at room temperature. Now, there's a lot to consider in the development of atherosclerosis. A lot to consider. But to oversimplify things but still be accurate, you don't want too many solid fats traveling through your bloodstream. It's better of the fat you consume to have more of it be liquid fat. That tends to protect us from clogging up our arteries, and that is very important. A little piece here on why this fat curves. For those of you who want to know, and if you don't need to know, just know unsaturated fats have a curve to them. These hydrogens all have a +1 charge, a positive charge. Even though they're connected with an electron to the carbon below, when they get near each other, they push each other apart because they're the same polarity, like two magnets coming together. So now that we've got the double bond and we're missing some hydrogens here, these two up top push each other away with more force than the two left at the bottom here because they are further away, and now that fat is curved. So let's take a look at a fun example here. I've got this fat here we just looked at called oleic acid, and then I've got another one upside down in front of it. So we've got some hydrogens here, we've got extra electrons in the double bonds, and imagine now if I were to grab this one on the top and try to bring it down to the bottom. as these extra electrons got near each other, they wouldn't let these fats get too close. They'd push them apart. And so in olive oil, for example, when these fats, olive oil has a lot of this stuff called oleic acid, when they get near each other, they repel each other. So they're constantly swimming around. That's what keeps them liquid at body temperature, whereas something like the fats found in coconut oil, we'll talk about that in a minute, they stay solid at body temperature. And so there's an electrical component and there is a structural component that changes when the fats get unsaturated. So let's take a look at these guys here. What if they get near each other? There's not much repelling force, so they're going to stay stuck together. And again, that's what keeps them solid. 157 degrees is the melting point versus 61 degrees Fahrenheit as the melting point. Let's go back for just a moment. You see this little formula here, 18, 0. If you want to hit pause and count the carbons, there are 18 of them. There are no double bonds because it's a saturated fat. That's why the 0 is there. Let's take a look at this one. 18, there's still 18 carbons. It says 1. There's one double bond. Some of you have heard the term monounsaturated. It's a monounsaturated fat because there's one double bond. And where is that double bond? This group here over at the right is the acid end. So if you start from the non-acid end and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that double bond is after the 9th carbon. That's why it's called an omega-9. And so we'll talk about the naming system coming up in a little bit. Okay, so these guys come near each other. They don't repel each other. All right, now you might be wondering about coconut oil. What if you have a medium chain saturated fat that's touted as health food, something like lauric acid, the most abundant fatty acid found in coconut oil? You can see here its formula is 12, 0. It's got 12 carbons instead of 18 carbons. Now this acid group at the end of each of these, that's the acid part of the fatty acid. The hydrocarbon chain here is the fat part. That's why it's called a fatty acid. This acid group is reactive and can repel other acid groups and react and stuff. So in this example of stearic acid, 1/18 of the carbon chain is reactive. In coconut oil here, in this lauric acid, 1/12 of the molecule is reactive. And so that's why it's got a lower melting point of 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So in other words, unless you have an out of control fever that's threatening your life, you're not going to be at 110 degrees. Your body's going to be at about 98 degrees. You will find that this fatty acid is actually solid at body temperature. One of the reasons we don't see coconut oil as health food. But some of you may be thinking, no, Dr. Rick, you got it wrong. The melting point of coconut oil is 76 degrees Fahrenheit, not 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that is a good point. The most abundant fatty acid in coconut oil is lauric acid, but it's not the only fatty acid in coconut oil. There are some omega-6 fats in there, maybe 6 or 7% of the fatty acids in coconut oil are omega-6 fats, and their melting point is 23 degrees Fahrenheit, much, much colder, so it averages out at 76. But the point is, when you consume coconut oil, even though those fats are not as long, they're saturated fats, they are solid at body temperature. Okay, so speaking of omega-6 fats and omega-3 fats, the essential fats. We started out with an 18-carbon saturated fat, then we looked at an 18-carbon monounsaturated fat, then we looked at the 12-carbon saturated, but that was just sort of a side note. Now let's look at this fat. It's called linoleic acid, and let's look at its formula here. 18 carbons, 2 double bonds, and it's an omega-6 fat. So we still see the 18 carbons. We've got our original double bond, but now we've got a new one over here. and it's after carbon number 6. That's why it's called an omega-6 fat. And you can see where there's no double bonds, the fat is straight, but where there are the double bonds, it gets curved. So it's more curved than the monounsaturated fat. Our body can't put this double bond in that position, so this is one of the essential fats. We have to get it from our diet. Then there is an omega-3 essential fat. Its formula, 18,3 omega-3. It's got the omega-9 double bond, the omega-6, and an omega-3. We see it's more curved and more fluid and more flexible than the previous ones. And imagine that two of these try to come near each other. They can't get very close together at all before they repel each other. So the melting point of linoleic acid here is 23 degrees Fahrenheit. The melting point of alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 essential fat, again, our body can't make it, but we need it, is only 12 degrees Fahrenheit, well below freezing. That's why, for example, you can put flax oil in the freezer and it gets thick, but you can still, if it's a plastic bottle, you can squeeze the bottle and it'll bloop out, kind of like thinned out toothpaste or something. So anyway, thanks for following along. That's what you need to know about the difference between saturated fats and unsaturated fats, whether they're solid or liquid, depending on how many double bonds there are in there. And the other really important thing that please keep in mind, because this is going to be extremely important when we talk about DHA, that these unsaturated fats, because of those double bonds, have extra electrons that can be used to conduct electrical activity. And that is really important. Okay, back to that these are essential fats. There's one omega-6 essential fat and one omega-3 essential fat that we need in our diets. So how much of them do we need? Different authorities have different opinions on this. For linoleic acid, I'm going to suggest you need about 4 grams per day to cover your basic needs. For alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 essential fat, I'm going to suggest 2 grams per day. The official dietary reference intake in the United States is 1.1 grams for women and 1.6 grams for men. So I'm suggesting just a little bit more. But if we look at this, that is 6 grams of total fat. Many of you know that 1 gram of fat has 9 calories, so that's 54 calories worth of fat to cover your essential fat needs. That's not a lot of fat. Sometimes people hear that I like talking about essential fats and they assume I advocate a ketogenic diet or something extreme and ridiculous like that. So I don't. So let's take a look at where those things can come from. So 100 calories worth of romaine lettuce has 0.7 grams of omega-3s. Well, wow, that gets you about half of the way to the DRI, and it gets you about 1/3 of the way to my recommendation. Now, 100 calories of lettuce is a very large head of romaine. So for your average person, that might not be feasible to get your omega-3s from leafy greens. But for those of you out there who are smart and motivated, and you want to include an abundance of leafy greens, not only lettuce, but kale and other things in your diet, it's not that unreasonable that you might consume 100 calories or so worth of that and get a significant amount of your omega-3s just from that. I was interested to learn recently that 100 calories of zucchini has 0.4 grams of omega-3s. That's awesome. Now, the rest of these foods here, we looked at 1,000 calories. So notice the difference, 100 for lettuce and zucchini, 1,000 for the rest of these things. 1,000 calories of cantaloupe, 1.4 grams. Now, that's an awful lot of cantaloupe. I'm not suggesting you consume that much, but might be about half your calorie intake. Interesting to see. Also has some omega-6 in there. 100 calories worth of bananas, 0.3 grams omega-3, 0.5 grams omega-6. Okay, how about some starches here? 1,000 calories of chickpeas has 0.3 grams like bananas, but it has 5.4 grams of omega-6. Brown rice, 0.1 grams of omega-3, 2.9 grams of omega-9. So it's got a 29-to-1 ratio of 6s to 3s. How about potatoes? Negligible amount of omega-3s in there, and it came up 0 omega-6s. Quinoa is actually pretty decent for omega-3s, 0.8 grams. That's a lot of quinoa, but again, you get the idea. We got to eat 2,000 calories roughly in a day. But it's got over 8 grams of omega-6s, so that's about a 10-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So I think we can see here, just from these few examples, and there's a lot more time you could spend looking all this up, and it's actually kind of fun if you're a nutrition nerd like Dr. Karen and I. You can see that if you base your diet on fruits and vegetables, and you consume a significant amount of leafy greens in your diet, you can meet your omega-3 needs just by doing that. No flax, hemp, chia, walnut, any of that other stuff, just from fruits and vegetables. Whereas if you base your diet very heavily on starches and don't include many leafy greens, you're actually not going to make it. Therefore, things like flax seeds and chia seeds become really critical, but that doesn't necessarily give you the best overall profile. So we'll continue to talk about this as we go on. So we mentioned that alpha-linolenic acid, let's go back here, is the omega-3 essential fat. We noted here that there is a whole family of omega-3 fats. So let's look at the other members of the omega-3 family. Here's one you've probably heard of called EPA. It's got a lot of double bonds. It looks like it's doing a backbend. It's got 5 double bonds here. And you can see it's got 20 carbons in the chain. So it's now longer and less saturated than the previous omega-3 fat we saw. And then another one you've heard of that we'll talk more about, DHA. It's really curved and the front and back are a little offset. It's got 6 double bonds and it's 22 carbons long. So it's yet longer and more unsaturated / less saturated than the other omega-3 fats. So here we have the entire family of omega-3s. ALA, okay, the omega-3 essential fat, and then EPA and DHA. They're most important, these 3. That's why they're in bigger font, and that's why I have numbered them. Now let's take a look down here. We said there's one omega-6 essential fat called linoleic acid. It has some other family members too, and the ones of significance are in bold. So we said ALA starts out with 18 carbons and has 3 double bonds. By the time we get down to the end here to DHA, we have 22 carbons. Instead of 18, it's a longer chain fat, and we have 6 double bonds instead of 3. Let's take a look at the omega-6 family. We start with 18,2 omega-6. By the time we get to the end, we've got 22,5 omega-6. So it's the exact same story. More double bonds, more carbons added as we go along. Every time you see one of these arrows, here's what's really fascinating. If there's nothing else you listen to, make sure you get this point. This enzyme here that adds a double bond to the omega-3 essential fat is called delta-6 desaturase. It makes the fat less saturated because it adds a double bond. And this enzyme here that turns 18,2 omega-6 into 18,3 omega-6 is also delta-6 desaturase. It's the exact same enzyme that does that. And then the next enzyme is an elongase enzyme. It adds some carbons. And then there's another desaturase and an elongase and another desaturase. So the omega-6 family uses the same set of enzymes that the omega-3 family does. So if you're just adding flax and chia and getting enough omega-3, ALA, in your diet, but you're still consuming processed foods, organic, vegan ice cream made with soy, and you have, for example, and so many other packaged processed foods, and you're eating too many omega-6s, or you're eating a high-fat diet with too many nuts and seeds, even if you're all raw, you're eating too much fat, you're going to get way more omega-6s compared to omega-3s. And what'll happen is the enzymes will be so busy working on the omega-6s, they won't be able to work on the omega-3s. That's known in science as competitive inhibition. And what's really interesting for me, having looked at many research articles looking at this question as if people can take ALA and convert it to DHA well, it doesn't look really good. It says we don't do that very effectively, because most people who are studied live near universities. They're eating modern foods. They're eating processed junk food with corn and cottonseed and soybean oil, really high in omega-6s. And they're eating domesticated animal foods, eating animals who have been fed corn and soy their whole lives. So they get like maybe 20 times more omega-6s than omega-3s. And in fact, conversion does not do well. The body does not make enough DHA. And that's where they come in and say you need fish oil, or that's where vegan salespeople come in and say you need to take our algae oil. The good news is, and this is one area that I have clinical experience in, I've measured a lot of my patients who base their diet on fruits and vegetables, and I have found that the conversion rates are much better than the typical population eating processed foods. And that is really good news. So that's one of the benefits of having a balanced fatty acid profile. And if we go back to just taking a quick look here at fruits and vegetables, that is one of their many benefits. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into DHA here. We said it's got 6 double bonds. That means a lot of electrical activity. It can conduct a lot of electrical activity. So it shouldn't be surprising that the most metabolically active tissues in the body are filled with DHA, like our brain cells, the retina of the eye, our adrenal glands, and testes. Very metabolically active. They have a lot of DHA. They need a lot of DHA in order to function properly. We'll also take a look at here, DHA is very important for proper functioning of hormone receptors within cell membranes. As we'll see, the hormone receptors exert a great deal of influence over how each hormone affects the cell. So we're going to look at insulin, serotonin, and something called angiotensin in the following examples. Okay, a little bit of science here. Here's a phosphate group, and here are 2 fatty acids. We know now this one looks saturated, this one looks monounsaturated, and there's a couple other models here. Phospholipids, see here we got the phospholipid bilayer. That's how fats end up in our cell membranes. So this is a cross section of a cell membrane. Here's the outside of the cell, and here is the inside of the cell. What I like about this diagram is it shows different fats. That one is straight. That looks like a saturated fat. This one is more curved. That's an unsaturated fat. They don't really have a picture of DHA in there. It'd be more like an offset circle. So what happens is the saturated fat and the cholesterol in the cell membrane add strength and rigidity and stiffness to the cell membrane, and we absolutely need some of that. It's super critical. But then the unsaturated fats, especially the omega-3s, with DHA being the most major example, add fluidity and flexibility and electrical conductivity to our cell membranes, and that is super critical. Let's take a look at this. The diagram looks like most of these are saturated fats, but what I like about this, again, we've got the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. You notice here we've got this receptor protein, and oversimplified, this is about what hormone receptors look like. So imagine this was the insulin receptor. Insulin comes over here to the binding site. It gives some instructions to the insulin receptor, and then the insulin receptor sends some instructions over to, we're going to pretend this is the glucose channel, and it opens up the glucose channel and it lets glucose, aka blood sugar, into the cell, and that helps regulate our blood sugar. When we don't have enough omega-3s in our diet, especially when we don't make enough DHA, and we have too much saturated fat and too much cholesterol, which is a very typical profile that most modern humans have, when insulin comes to bind to this insulin receptor, the insulin receptor does not respond very readily. The glucose channel doesn't open up. Glucose stays in the blood. It doesn't get in the cells. Now you have elevated blood sugar. You get glycation reactions. You get acidity. You get all sorts of challenges. You get free radical generation. And these are some of the complications of diabetes, higher rates of heart disease, and other challenges. When we have a healthier mix of fats in the cell membrane, when this cell membrane is electrically conductive enough, then the insulin receptor works more effectively. The signal can get over to the glucose channel. We have decreased insulin resistance. We have better blood sugar control. That is fantastic. Okay, so things like insulin don't work as well when we have that unhealthy fatty profile. Hormones like serotonin don't work as well either, can lead to depression. There's many examples of people who have changed their diets to a healthier diet, which includes a healthier fatty acid profile, who have improved their mood significantly, and some have actually weaned themselves off of their antidepressant medication. You want to be incredibly careful. I wouldn't recommend you do that yourself. Check with your prescribing doctor. You don't want to do that too suddenly, but there have been some really good case histories. Now, other hormones, when we have an unhealthy profile, have an exaggerated effect. One of them is called angiotensin, and I'm not going to get too complicated here, but there's angiotensin 1 and 2 and a few other forms. And when angiotensin is exaggerated, which again happens from that unhealthy mix of fats in the cell membrane, because those hormone receptors live in the environment of the cell membrane and that environment influences them, we can have exaggerated fluid retention, and that can increase our blood pressure because angiotensin turns into angiotensin 2, and that by itself, as well as it stimulates another hormone called aldosterone, those tell the kidneys to reabsorb sodium and increase fluid and make us swell up and increase our blood pressure. So what happens in typical modern medical practice? Well, isn't this interesting? Has anyone ever heard of gestational diabetes? Woman's never diabetic before, but then, week 28 or so into pregnancy, her blood sugar goes up. There are many factors here. All this stuff's multifactorial, but it's well known that within women who are pregnant and breastfeeding, there is a major drain upon the DHA reserves because you're building a new nervous system, you're building a new brain and spinal cord and peripheral nerves that all need DHA. You're literally supplying the raw materials for your baby's brain. Your body is going to take it out of you and give it to the baby. That could be a contributing factor to gestational diabetes. Babies can't make their own DHA. DHA is an essential fat for babies. They can't make their own till about 6 months old. So fortunately, DHA is supplied in breast milk. So there's a lot of DHA coming out of mom going into her milk to feed the baby's brain. That could be one contributor to postpartum depression. Okay, there's other factors too, hormone drop, not getting sleep, etc. And then a lot of women also, when they're pregnant, end up with preeclampsia. They swell up a lot and their blood pressure goes up. So sufficient DHA is incredibly important during pre-pregnancy to build up your reserves, pregnancy, and breastfeeding for the health of mom and baby. We want baby's eyes to work well. We want baby's brain to work well. We want to maximize their IQ. We want to help those hormone receptors like serotonin work well so baby doesn't end up with ADHD and temper tantrums and excessive behavioral problems that they don't need to have if they had enough DHA. But what happens in modern practice? Well, gestational diabetes, no problem. We'll give you some medication. Got some postpartum depression or any other kind of depression? Hey, we'll give you an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. We will artificially boost your serotonin level instead of giving you enough DHA and changing your diet and improving your fatty acid profile so serotonin can work properly in the first place, or more specifically, so the serotonin receptor can respond properly in the first place. For preeclampsia, what might they do? Or if you have high blood pressure, ACE inhibitors, angiotensin converting enzyme, right? It affects angiotensin. And if you don't convert angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, you don't have that hormone telling your kidneys to reabsorb sodium. You excrete more sodium, fluid follows it, less blood volume, less swelling, decreased blood pressure. Or if they don't put you on an ACE inhibitor, they might put you on a beta blocker or a calcium channel antagonist or a diuretic. And the good news is diet and lifestyle can improve your blood pressure without medications the great majority of the time. So after many years of talking to our students and our patients about this and discussing the value of it, at last we get to put this into personal practice, because as we speak here in August of 2021, Dr. Karen is about to give birth to our first child, and as you can imagine, we could not be happier. But getting back to the topic directly here, we have been following her fatty acid profile to make sure all is well. Her most recent A1C, for those of you familiar with that, was 4.9. We're really happy with that. Most recent fasting glucose was 82. That's excellent. So no gestational diabetes. She's prepartum, so we don't know if there's going to be any depression yet, but everything seems good. And her blood pressure is excellent. It's gone up a slight bit. It's usually in the mid 90s over low 60s. Most recently, about 7 or 8 months in, it was 104 over 64, still excellent. So we're very happy that things are going well and making sure her DHA reserves are good from testing and interpreting it properly. Can't tell you how important the interpreting it properly component of that is. Things are going really well, and we know our baby's going to be healthy, and we can't wait to meet him. Karen knows him pretty well at this point, pretty intimately. I'm looking forward to meeting him very soon. Now, I mentioned in my practice where I have studied a lot of people who base their diet on fruits and vegetables, I've seen very good DHA levels without any outside source of DHA. Okay, when you don't eat all that excessive omega-6, omega-3 conversion can happen effectively. Now, fortunately, even though that's not common in the literature, I'm not the only one. Here's a study from the UK from a few years ago that's looked at this also. So remember we said alpha-linolenic acid was the omega-3 essential fat. I called it fat number 1. Boys in blue, girls in pink, men and women, fish eaters, meat eaters, vegetarians, and vegans. A little bit of a difference here, but they all consume roughly a gram of ALA per day. They're not making my recommendation. Here's the intake of DHA. So the fish eaters are getting some of that. By the way, it's in the cold water fish because DHA has a super low melting point. It keeps the fish fluid and flexible in the really cold water. If they were made out of coconut oil or olive oil, they'd be too stiff to swim. It's no wonder they're filled with omega-3s like EPA and DHA. So the fish eaters had a good amount of DHA, meat eaters a little bit, vegetarians a smidgen, but the vegans had none. No DHA in the vegans. But when we look at the DHA levels in their bodies, all the groups were about the same. The vegan men were a little lower. The vegan women were actually a little bit higher. So isn't that interesting to see? Now, I love that this study segmented the different groups to look at them specifically. There were about 7,000 people in this study, and 5 of them were vegan, 0.2%. I've studied about 30 of them, and I share the case histories in our plant-based nutrition curriculum. In fact, we got about 6 hours worth of essential fats in that curriculum. We take a deep dive into things and make it all make sense for people who are really enthused about plant-based nutrition. So let's conclude here. Basing your diet on fruits and vegetables, especially by including an abundance of leafy greens, is, in my opinion, the best way to assure not only meeting your essential fat needs, but providing a healthy fatty acid profile for your cell membrane so hormones work right. So that's what's floating through your blood. It can help lower cholesterol and triglycerides, and just so many things work so well. Now, if you're not quite on board, a giant bowl of salad just doesn't seem that appealing to you, it's good to know that 1 tablespoon of flax or chia seeds can meet your basic omega-3 needs for the day, and hopefully you're not consuming an excessive amount of omega-6s. You can always put your daily diet into some nutrient profile database or nutrient database and see the profile and see how you're doing. So the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, very, very important. You don't want more than about ideally 4 times more omega-6s compared to omega-3s. As we discussed here, that allows omega-3 conversion to occur properly to make enough DHA, and incredibly super important that we're not going to discuss here is that helps to create an anti-inflammatory environment, whereas too many omega-6s creates a pro-inflammatory environment, and inflammation is at the root cause of so many pathological processes. So another reason this whole discussion is so critically important. So what if you eat really well, get enough omega-3s, lots of fruits and vegetables, not too many omega-6s, and despite your best efforts, your DHA could still be a little bit higher? The good news is there are many products these days from algae and algae oil that you can consume. That's where the fish get their EPA and DHA from algae. You don't need to consume fish, because then you got to deal with mercury, dioxin, PCBs, and you have to deal with the environmental consequences of that too. Like 40% of the plastic floating around in the ocean are from fishing nets that they just cut and let go. Rather go right to the algae, and it's the safest because it's lowest on the food chain, so it's lowest in any environmental contamination, and it's the best environmentally as well. Hope you all have enjoyed learning a little bit about omega-3 fats and essential fats here in general. And for those of you who would like to keep learning about whole food plant-based nutrition, please stay tuned to hear about our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition whole food plant-based curriculum. Now that we've finished the educational content for this webinar, we'll move on to take a look at our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition plant-based curriculum. In today's webinar, we covered just a tiny sampling of what we have to offer in this area. So for those of you wishing to continue your education with us, you may want to consider our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive curriculum. It's a 1-year program, and the next program starts on September 1st, 2021. We recommend a time commitment of 4 to 5 hours per week. If you had 2 to 3, that would be reasonable, but if you can commit 4 to 5, that will really allow you to get the most out of the curriculum, which is what we want for all of you. So for those of you willing to put in a few hours a week for an entire year, we understand that's a big commitment. And of course, to cover the financial commitment, you can dramatically increase your chances for success, and we make the learning process fun while we're at it. First, we'll look at some of the topics that we cover in the course, and then we'll go into how it is delivered. So first of all, we have a gigantic array of topics that are covered in the curriculum. Pretty much everything important that you ever wanted to know about plant-based and raw food nutrition. based on our decades of personal research, course development, education, and clinical experience in this field. Now, we cover so much: energy healing and calorie density, basics of nutrition, blood sugar regulation. Each one of these thumbnails is about 2 hours of a segment for each week. Raw food sources and nutrients, calcium and vitamin D, vitamin B12, essential fats, acid-alkaline balance, cleansing and detoxification, not just philosophy, but real science. Where do you get your protein? Essentials of human digestion, enzymes, longevity and youth extension, where we look at long-lived people and cellular mechanisms, and we put 2 and 2 together. Health statistics 1 and 2, the history of raw and living foods. We look at the different camps and we understand where they're coming from, where they agree with each other, where they disagree, and why we see disagreements today. You know, it's just follows the logical chain of events. Raw 2 approaches, foundations of the raw food diet, food combining, raw food weight loss, classic studies in support of plant-based nutrition. This is a 2-week section, covers about 4 hours. We look at McDougall, PCRM, Framingham Heart Study, Ornish, Esselstyn, the China study, so much of the classic plant-based nutrition studies. Then we go on to describe that when we cook certain foods, depending on the cooking method, we actually form carcinogens, but we tell you how to avoid those even if you're not completely raw. Then Dr. Karen talks about the effects of heating on food from a nutrient perspective. We look at organic versus non-organic. Now, please keep in mind that anyone can come up with a list of topics that sounds impressive, but the question is, how much experience do they have in these areas, and how much experience do they have educating others? We have an awful lot of that. So some other topics we cover: grains and plant families. Dr. Karen mentioned that her second undergrad degree was in molecular biology, and she studied all this stuff about plant families. And when we look at grains and different plant foods, that actually helps to explain why certain plant foods are rich in certain nutrients depending on which family they are in. Making sense of food labels, psychological factors of health and healing, candida, DHA, xenoestrogens, and phytoestrogens, water fasting and juice fasting, where we get some of my clinical experience from True North involved. A survey of superfoods and supplements. Dr. Karen looks at the real peer-reviewed research literature and compares that with the marketing claims of various superfoods, and we sort of learn who's naughty and who's nice, who's telling the truth and who's making exaggerated claims, so you can have the information to make excellent decisions. Raw food sources of nutrients expanded, raw food exaggerations. The history of human food choices. Did meat get our big brains? Was it starches? Was it fruit? Dr. Karen examines the literature of those competing theories and gives a fair assessment. The big question of animal products. Do we need them? The importance of sleep. That and psychological factors and the autonomic nervous system that you'll see in the next slide are 3 of our not directly nutritionally related topics, but they operate together with, and sometimes nutrition happens underneath their umbrella. So some other important things to look at to round out the entire picture. Menu planning for various health challenges, an expanded view of carbohydrates, more about weight loss. Sweeteners. We don't recommend sweeteners, but some people like to make a few fancy things. It's good to know what's going on so you can make the best choices about what to put in your recipes. Importance of hydration, research and support of raw food nutrition. This is another 2-week section where we study what's going on and understand things to help us make sense. Nutrient analyses of various plant foods, and then the next week, various sample diets. Really starts to put things together to see what type of dietary approaches are the most complete and which ones just make claims but don't really add up. So we look at a standard modern diet, we look at a paleo diet, we look at a starch-centered plant-based diet, we look at a couple of different raw food diets, and we really see what's going on. Then we take that model and specifically look at the fatty acid profile, first of different foods, then of different diets, with special emphasis on omega-3 conversion, including many case histories of long-term plant-based eaters, including many raw foodists who have been my patients over the years, who I have studied. So that's part of where my clinical practice and experience makes its way into the curriculum. We have some more. Survey of superfoods. Let me let those come out one at a time. More superfoods and supplements. An overview of energy. Gosh, that's where Dr. Karen looks at all the pathways of where carbohydrates and fat and protein can go, but translates it into English so it all makes sense. Sea vegetables. What we call advanced functions of dietary fiber that leads into probiotics and prebiotics, so you will have an extremely solid foundation to speak with anybody with authority about probiotics and the human microbiome. The pleasure trap, the work of Drs. Doug Lisle and Alan Goldhammer, so critically important. As I mentioned earlier, the autonomic nervous system, and then overcoming challenges and pitfalls in plant-based and raw food nutrition. This actually covers about a week and a half. At this point, we are done with our third out of our fourth notebook, and this is an overview section that also brings some new information into play and takes a look at where people can go wrong, where they can make mistakes, and why that causes them to no longer be vegan anymore. More than once it's happened that during this section and during some other sections of the class, our students have been looking on YouTube and seeing who's defecting from the plant-based movement, and they're like, oh my God, if they had only taken this class and understood this, they could stay in the movement instead of leaving it. It just brings a lot together. And then we start on our educator material. And about 20% of our students wish to go on and educate others. About 10% are already doing so and want to refine and learn more and have more confidence and be able to help people more effectively and answer their questions more effectively so they have more confidence in them. And the other 10% are on their path doing that, starting out by getting educated with us first and then going on. So for the other 80%, we haven't forgotten about those students. A lot of this material comes in so handy when your friends and your family members and your coworkers are asking you questions about your diet. We have several weeks where we just practice answering hundreds of different questions that you might get asked about these things and how to handle those with grace and elegance rather than being on the defensive and being antagonistic about things. And that aspect of plant-based eating, being different from the rest of the world, when you can navigate the unhealthy world successfully, that helps us be healthier. That helps us have more confidence in interacting with other people. And so that really near the end there ties a whole bunch of things together. Dr. Karen talks about how to continue to research on your own after the course is over, tips and tricks that she learned as a research assistant and she's been doing on her own for 15 or so years now. Things like putting this class together. And then we finish off with seeing the big picture of health and the raw health continuum. So by the time our students complete this course, their level of understanding and confidence in a whole food plant-based diet with a foundation of raw fruits and vegetables is at an extremely high level. Over and over again, they tell us how much they appreciate our thorough and unbiased approach. And our position is all you have to do is tell the truth, and the benefits of plant-based nutrition are naturally revealed. No outrageous claims, nothing crazy, just amazing health supporting results. So before going on, I just wanted to share one quick case history from a student of ours in our 2019-2020 class. And she says, "Hi, I'm Danny, and I love the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition course. I have learned so much about the benefits of raw and living food that has improved my own knowledge of nutrition, and I've been able to help others now as well. I have a solid foundation of nutrition now to bring into my traditional medical practice." Danny actually has several advanced nursing degrees. "The program definitely over-delivers content and brings up subjects that I didn't even think of, but truly found interesting. Thank you, Dr. Rick and Dr. Karen, for taking the time to put all of this together in a way that makes sense and makes it totally applicable to implement right away." So we're always honored to hear things like this. We love having other healthcare providers in class with us. Typically about 10% of our students are healthcare providers, and some even have, advanced degrees like medical doctors and people with PhDs, several nurses, some of our chiropractic and naturopathic colleagues, etc. So how do we deliver this to get students to that point? So first of all, there are about 2 hours per week of professional quality videos, similar to what you're seeing here on this webinar. Now you can watch these videos at your own schedule. They're available 24/7 as long as you're connected to the internet. Once they are released each week, they stay there for the rest of the course, so you can always review, and you can watch them as many times as you want. They are 2 hours is typically broken down into maybe 4 or 5, 20 or 30-minute segments, so you can chunk things down accordingly and fit them into your schedule. Now, every hour that our students see, and including what you see in the educational part of this webinar, typically takes us a full-time week to put together, even with our background and experience, to read a bunch of research, to put it all together, to make sense out of everything, to make charts and graphs and figure out how to deliver it in a way that's understandable is a huge amount of effort. You can save yourself years and decades of time by utilizing what we have to offer, so we make extremely efficient use of your time. Now, also, we just recently added a couple of years ago the audio version of those weekly videos. So you can listen to those on your own schedule, same things as many times as you want. And oftentimes when people are driving or exercising or multitasking, you want to bring your phone with you. You don't have necessarily a laptop, or you can't see everything on a phone screen anyway, although most of them are pretty high resolution that day. You can still do pretty well. But if you want to make it easier and just listen and save a lot of mobile data, we have the audio MP3s available as well. Now, along with the videos, we have very comprehensive notebooks. We have 4 of those that we send you throughout the year. It's about 900 pages worth of notes, and there are thousands of scientific references in the back that we used in order to put this curriculum together. Now, what these notes are not is they are not transcripts. We know a lot of people with online courses just say, oh yeah, we've got notes for you. They have some software, make a transcript, and everything you said is written out in paragraph form. I remember seeing those once, and it said, I need some water, because they were clearing their throat and they didn't edit that out. That's not what these notes are. These are in charts and graphs and bullet points to lay everything out logically, to complement what you see in the educational videos, so you don't have to distract your focus trying to write everything down. You can pay attention to what you're seeing on the screen, and you may want to write a few other things in your notes or hit pause every now and then, but for the most part, those notes are there and they really help enhance the learning process. They are also lifetime reference material, so years after the course is over, you have all of this information available at your fingertips. We're going to take a quick look at some of the pages. So here we have some tables and some various things. It doesn't say proof and have our watermark behind it in the actual notes. We have some, you can see the charts and everything else. Here's some other information. You see all the graphics, and there's some information about protein, for example. Now, what we also do is if we can see here, if I'm lined up, we print the name of the course on the spine of these. So when you've got them lined up in your notebook, they are all ready to go. Once again, a lifetime of reference material at your fingertips. Okay, so then we have weekly quizzes that are interactive. So after you go through the videos for that week, you can take a 5-question typically quiz. You answer, and then it tells you if you're right or wrong, and then it gives you an explanation of what's going on with that question to help enhance the learning process. Then once you're done with all that, it gives you all 5 questions and the explanations. Takes about 10 minutes or so to go through that. You can retake it as many times as you want. We just implemented that for our current year's class, and thus far it looks like it's going really well because our students are taking advantage of that, again, to enhance the learning process. Now, all of that thus far is on your own, but we don't leave you hanging. 6 to 8 times per month, we have live video conferences. They're on Tuesdays at 2 different times. You can see the times here. So no matter where you are in the world and what type of schedule you have, it's likely that one of these times will work for you. So when there are 3 Tuesdays per month, which is typical, there's 6 conferences, occasionally there's 4, and then there's 8 conferences. So with those, you come on video conferences, you interact. If it's my topic for that week, you'll be interacting with me live. If it's Dr. Karen's, you'll be interacting with her. Sometimes we are both there. So you can raise your hand visually or by hitting the raise hand icon and ask us questions directly, or you can type questions in either during the call in the chat, or if these times don't work either all the time or occasionally, you can always type your questions in advance of the call. We've got it very easy. We've got it set up so it's very easy to do that. And then what we do is we go back and forth between questions written in and live questions on those conferences, and we audio record each of them and save them back to the course site so you can always go listen to the recording and then hear the answers to your questions, as well as the questions and our answers from your fellow students. So that's very, very handy. Also, for the first 4 years teaching this class online, we had a Facebook group. This current year and continuing on, we now actually have private groups within the course. So there are no privacy issues, there's no ads, there's no things that you don't want to see in there. And we've actually broken it down into a social group where you can get to know your fellow students, you can post recipes, you can talk about how the holidays went and the challenges with some of your relatives, or some success stories of eating healthfully, you're off your medication, your A1C's down, whatever the case may be. And then we also have a separate study group. And in the study group, typically, sometimes we'll get a really good question on our live conferences, and we will sometimes look up some articles and give some links and then put those in the study group to help enhance answering students' questions and making sense out of everything. A couple of our quotes from recent students. Susan from California says, "This class is incredibly beneficial and beautifully taught." Sam from New York says, "I have taken many courses in plant-based nutrition and hold certifications from many different health institutions. However, there is none that I hold in higher regard than the one I will receive from Mastering Raw Food Nutrition. It is the most detailed, scientific, and complete program from any I have taken. From all the courses I have taken, this is the one I recommend for serious nutrition enthusiasts." Now, one of those courses that Sam took was the plant-based nutrition course from eCornell, which we also hold in very high esteem. And what Sam has said is typical of many eCornell graduates who have joined us. They said they loved eCornell, they loved the scientific rigor and the validity and the solidness and credibility of everything in that course. And then, we tell them, we're very much the same way in how we teach, and that if they want to learn more topics and have an emphasis on fruits and vegetables and go into more depth and detail, that we are the logical next step. So we're honored when eCornell graduates join us to continue their learning process. And Sam and his family are up to some really cool stuff about healthy eating and sustainable living and teaching other people how to do that in upstate New York. So it's a true honor when people like him join us to help enhance them on their journeys, making the world a better place. A couple of things about exposure versus cohesion. Dr. Karen has about 3/4 or so of a naturopathic medical degree. She finished a chiropractic school. She did just a summer preceptorship at True North. I was there for 4 years. So we bring different things to the table, but at the same time, we think of things in a very similar way, and we are a married couple, both who have doctorate degrees, so there's a great amount of cohesiveness to the information as well. So this isn't one of these courses where we just have, this person talk about this talk about this. In a way, that's good because they each have expertise in one area, but we have a very broad perspective on all this, and in many areas, we also have a lot of depth. So we're really able to put everything together in a cohesive whole. There's a lot of synergy, and it's a real winning combination. And we're total nerds, so it's fun for us, and I think that comes across to a lot of our students. So before we wrap up and summarize how the course works, a couple of other testimonials from our students. Tim in Tennessee says, "I've learned a tremendous amount from this course, and it revolutionized my eating life. The science was detailed, fascinating, and life-changing. Though I am not 100% raw yet," he says, "I have moved far in that direction based on what I learned. Plus now I have the least damaging ways to cook foods and have completely converted to using only those approaches when I do cook. The video lessons were all fun and informative, and the conferences warm and immensely helpful. I learned a ton from the other students as well. I am so glad I took this course." He said in another part of our survey, "Great course, so useful and life-changing, loved the depth of science." And Tim was one of those students. He was there at every conference asking excellent questions, was really into it, and we can see how much of a difference it makes. Like any other endeavor, the more you put in, the more you get out. And like with Sam and our other students, are just honored to have been able to share that with Tim and make a real difference in his life. And by the way, we have so many good testimonials that if you go to our website, rawfoodeducation.com, and click on the testimonials, even though we'd love to put them all in here in the interest of time, we're just putting a few of them in there, but you can read a lot more there. The last one we'll share in this webinar here is from Annette in the UK. And she said, "I had high expectations of this course when I started, as I took the course with my husband, had already seen some of the work of Drs. Rick and Karen, and I have to say, my high expectations have been well and truly exceeded. Many other online courses feel anonymous with a sense of distance from the course provider. This is far from the case with Mastering Raw Food Nutrition. Drs. Rick and Karen get to know their students despite the physical distance. They are responsive, interested, and approachable." And by the way, when Annette and her husband took the course, we didn't even have live video conferencing yet. We were on more of a conference call where everyone could hear us and we could hear them, but there wasn't the visual, so it's even better now. She goes on to say, "This is the best study decision I have taken since studying for my degree in the 1980s. That one had a profound impact on my future, and this one is highly likely to do the same. There is rigor and depth to this course. all of which is conveyed in such a way that a non-scientist such as me is able to understand it and assimilate it for later use. For anyone interested in really learning about plant-based nutrition, I can recommend this course unreservedly, and we really do go out of our way to have scientific rigor, but to translate it into English as well to make sure that you understand it. That's the goal, because then you're empowered to go out and make a difference in your life. So to summarize here, we have 2 hours worth of professional video educational videos per week, as well as the audio-only versions for those of you who are so inclined. We have thoughtfully designed notebooks to go along with each subject and that cover the whole course, lifetime reference material there. We have those weekly interactive quizzes. We have near weekly live video conference every Tuesday, except the last Tuesday of the month. And we have private social and study groups, and all of it is designed to give you the knowledge and confidence to keep on track and make the best decisions, to give you a lifetime of supercharged health. We want to thank you so much for joining us today.
We'll be sending you an email shortly where we invite those of you really excited about the course to speak with us to help determine if mastering raw food nutrition is a good fit for you. You can also click on the schedule link that's on your screen right now. Now we're going to take a 5-minute intermission, and then we'll be back to answer questions about the course and plant-based and raw food nutrition. In the meantime, please feel free to sign up for a time to speak with us. We look forward to speaking with you soon.